us off at number 10, Rashad Hawkins. He may not be evil, but he certainly isn't innocent. Rashad Hawkins was attending child support court and was sentenced to serve some time due to his negligence and failure to pay. Now, instead of doing the time or paying what he owed, Rashad decided running was the route he was gonna take. Before he was even taken into custody, Hawkins managed to evade authorities by jumping over a second-story railing and fleeing the building before they could catch him. He stayed on the run for 20 days before eventually being caught and now faces charges of criminal trespassing, assault, and evading arrest. So all in all, he made it much worse on himself.
Coming in at number 9 is John Dillinger, aka Public Enemy Number 1. You have to be pretty freaking bad for the FBI to name you Public Enemy Number 1. John Dillinger was an American gangster and murderer that was super active during the Great Depression. The terror gang he worked with was accused of robbing over 24 banks and 4 police stations. Now, the first time he was arrested, he was taken to a jail in Indiana where he befriended 8 seasoned bank robbers who helped him with his first escape later on. After being paroled, John immediately went back to committing crime, and in August of 1933 he was robbing a bank and was later caught and arrested by police. Once back in his cell, he hatched a plan with his previous inmate friends. They smuggled guns into their cells and escaped 4 days after he had been incarcerated. John and his gang were arrested again a year later in Indiana and were taken to Crown Point Jail, a jail said to be escape-proof. Clearly they hadn't met our man yet. On March 3rd, John and another inmate used a fake gun that he'd apparently carved out of wood from the shelving in his cell and blackened with shoe polish. The guards were fooled by his weapon, thinking it was real, and let him walk. He continued on his crime spree before he was finally killed in a shootout with the FBI a few months later.
Next up at number 8, Mysterious Man. Now, unfortunately, I could not find the name of this escapee. All that I know is that he was from Washington, so if you know his name, leave it below in the comments. The mystery man took off his prison uniform while still in the courtroom, which I can only assume was empty. But if that was the case, why was a convict left alone in the first place? Whatever, that's not the point. Now, stripped of his uniform and semi-blending in with the civilians in the courthouse, he bolts straight out the front door, running past many witnesses. Although from what I can tell on the blurry footage, it does look like he was running barefoot, which, I don't know, that's kind of clue number 2 for me. People aren't generally running around barefoot in a courthouse with good news, but hey, what do I know? Anyways, he was found a few hours later and put back into custody, and like every other person on this list, things were much worse from there on out for him. And next up at number 7, Tanner Jacobson and Cody Howard. I'm gonna go out on a limb here with little to no evidence of this being fact, but I'm gonna guess that most courtroom judges aren't starting off their day expecting to have to run around chasing delinquents down a flight of stairs. Well, whether Judge Buzzard saw it coming or not, this is exactly what his day entailed. When 2 young men, Tanner Jacobson and Cody Howard, came into his courtroom on October 16th, 2018. The 2 men made a run for it straight out of the courtroom, still in their handcuffs, and the judge quickly shed his robe and bolted right after them, chasing them down 4 flights of stairs, all the while yelling, "Stop, stop, you're only making this worse." But still they continued. Buzzard only managed to catch Howard, but Jacobson didn't make it much further before being caught by authorities after just a few blocks outside. They should have listened to the judge, because they did indeed make it much worse. Next up at number 6, Leonid Gracier. In 2019, Leonid was convicted for killing his younger sister, and upon his arrest told authorities Satan had demanded him. Well, it wouldn't be the first time we've heard that excuse. Seemingly unfazed by what he had committed, he was put into custody in Moscow, where apparently it's common to put prisoners into these boxes to detain them. Perhaps what they seemed to forget was handcuffs, however, as the killer tried to escape the confines by crawling up into the ceiling of the courthouse. He was nearly successful, but didn't manage to get very far before police tased him and pulled him back down from the ceiling. During his confession, he said he didn't regret his actions and essentially that he stood by his crimes and said that he had made everything better in doing them. So while he didn't technically succeed in his escape, I think we can all agree that we're glad that's the case. Coming in at number 5, a helping hand. Like most things in life, things are easier with the help of your friends. But unfortunately in this case, Callum was a 21-year-old helping his teenage friend escape a 5-month jail sentence. At first, the teen was just convicted for stealing a cell phone and for whatever reason decided his best option was to make a break for it. Bailiffs went after him but weren't actually too worried at first, as the door to exit required someone to push a button on the other side of it for it to open. Well, little did they know he had someone to do that very job. The accomplice, Callum Finter, ended up also being arrested for helping the teen escape, but he tried to claim that it was a total accident and he didn't mean to push the button. I don't know, but it seems pretty intentional to me looking at the footage there. This story didn't seem to win over anyone, and he was ultimately sentenced to 3 months in jail for aiding his friend in his escape. The teen was on the run for 2 days but was later found and ended up having another 6 months added to his sentence. Have you ever heard the saying, "Not all help is good help"? Just saying, it might have been something to think about before getting caught up in all this mess. Next up at number 4, Quantrell Schwartzlow. This piece of work was under arrest for some brutal domestic violence, and despite that, was still left alone. Now, I don't know what it is about leaving criminals alone for a minute, especially those that are committed for some serious and dangerous crimes, but it just seems to me like once they are in custody, they should be continuously observed. Well, as you guessed it, Quantrell should have been kept under a closer watch. Though he was handcuffed, that didn't seem to stop him from escaping out of a window in an interrogation room in what can only be described as a swan dive out of the building. How he managed it, I don't quite understand. How he didn't break every bone in his body on the way down, also a mystery. But luckily he was caught about 3 hours later hiding out at a friend's house and was eventually charged not only for his escape but also the unruly crimes he committed on his girlfriend. Next up at number 3, Christopher Lee Ruffin. Back in 2012, while appearing in court for a probation violation, Christopher was sentenced to another 90 days in jail. Now, I don't know what he was originally charged for or any of the details of his case, but all in all, 90 days doesn't seem like it's as bad as it could get. But apparently it was still too much for Christopher. His runaway is especially wild to me because it's not just that he managed to escape, but he was actually tased by 2 of the bailiffs and still managed to continue running while being tased. He then ran past security and straight out the front door. In the next few hours, he tried to get multiple rides, threatening strangers to drive him out of town, but the police ended up catching up to him and took him back to jail. Now, this is just a wild guess, but I have a feeling he was looking at more than 90 days after the shenanigans he pulled. Coming in at number 2, Deontay Rasiles. In 2014, this convict was arrested for the burglary and killing of a woman named Jill Sue, for which he claimed he was being framed. Well, as he puts it, to prove his innocence, he decided to escape the courthouse with the help of some other inmates and his girlfriend. And I mean, really, what says innocent more than a secret inmate collab and a getaway car? It seems like his accomplice helped to remove his handcuffs, and then he had some twin brothers distract a guard and give him a signal for when to make a run for it. He then slipped out of a fire exit and ran to the getaway car where his girlfriend had a change of clothes for him, and they drove off in a flash. This was a very high profile case considering what he was on trial for, and caused a huge manhunt across Florida, with SWAT teams and helicopters roaming the city all hours of the day. He was missing for a week, but thankfully was found. Now back in custody, he faces a potential life sentence with the death penalty for his crimes, although he still maintains his innocence in the entire ordeal. And last up in our number 1 spot, Ted Bundy. Ah yes, the notorious and downright evil killer who needs no introduction. But despite being convicted of killing and committing other horrors to at least 30 women, he was granted way more independence than should have been allowed to someone of his security level. People felt he was very charming and seemed to conveniently forget what he was in custody for. Well, Bundy took advantage of that, and in June of 1977, while on trial for one of his many killings, he was left alone in a courtroom library to prepare, as he was representing himself in court. While alone and out of sight from the guards, Bundy managed to open a window and make a run for it. He jumped out of the 2nd-story window, injuring his ankle, and managed to disappear into the woods for 6 days. days. He was, of course, found, convicted, and eventually sentenced to death for all of his crimes, but it's one of the craziest escape stories to this day.
At number 10, we have Corona containment. There was recently a massive riot at a prison in Foggia, Italy. If you have been paying attention to what has been going on with the coronavirus, you will know that Italy has one of the worst outbreaks in the world. So many of the prisons throughout the country have been doing different things to make sure they don't have an outbreak in the prison. One of these things was reducing the amount of visitation that prisoners have from outside family members. It's a pretty simple solution, but inmates didn't like this at all. It was most likely crossed with the stress of coronavirus spreading like wildfire, but the prisoners had enough. They started a riot, and in all the mayhem, 16 prisoners were able to escape and run off to freedom. There were also 12 inmates that managed to break into the confiscated drug area and get super high. Frankly, they got too high. All 12 of them had an overdose. I guess that's one way to do it. You don't want to die in prison or the mayhem of the riot, so you just give yourself a lethal dose of drugs and then send off to another world. At number 9, we have the Arizona trio. When you break out of jail, you think you would want to keep a low profile. Like if I was ever in jail and then I broke out, my God, I would be on the run and you wouldn't hear a peep from me. But these guys were different. In 2015, there was a massive riot at the Arizona State Penitentiary, and in all the madness, 3 dudes managed to get outside of the prison. Now, the first thing they did was hide and find new clothes, but not long after they got their disguises figured out, they went and killed a couple that were on vacation in Arizona. They probably needed some money and supplies, but that can't be the smartest way to do it. It didn't take long, but the 3 murderers were caught and eventually sent back to where they just came from. At number 8, we have more COVID fears. As tensions rise about COVID-19 and many of the world's prisons are in terrible conditions, prisoners start to fear for their lives. The Buriram prison in Thailand was one of these places. Prisoners had heard of the worsening conditions of COVID-19 and decided that they weren't going to sit down and die. 100 inmates started to destroy everything in their path in an open area in the prison, until enough inmates and guards got involved. This was a very clever distraction and they were able to escape. This breakdown happened on March 28th, 2020, and it is unclear how many men were able to use this diversion to get out of the prison. A few men were once again detained, but some are still at large. At number 7, we have the Montana State Prison riot. Now, in this riot, there were a couple near escapes, but no one really got out, but the story is so crazy I had to put it on the list. It's like Bonnie and Clyde meets Shawshank Redemption meets Fast and the Furious 9. In the 1950s, the once great Montana State Prison had become one of the worst hellholes on the planet. The prison was packed to the brim with criminals, and the conditions were so horrible that inmates were constantly getting sick. There were 2 men who devised a plan to either change the prison or escape. It was Jerry Miles. He had been in the prison for so long he was one of the big dogs on campus, and his newly convicted 19-year-old boyfriend Lee Smart. They managed to get their hands on some gasoline from another inmate and created torches, and then they covered a guard in gasoline and threatened to light him on fire. The guard decided to turn over his weapons and keys in exchange for his life. From there, all hell broke loose. A ton of inmates were released from their cells and they killed the deputy warden. Not long after that, the National Guard arrived, and now the inmates were in a standoff. At this time, Miles and Lee and a few other inmates were attempting to tunnel out of the prison. They would have got out if they had only started earlier. The National Guard came in and most of the inmates laid down their weapons and accepted that the riot was over. But Lee and Miles weren't going down without a fight. The 2 ended up dying in a shootout with the National Guard. At number 6, we have ISIS members escaped. This riot just happened. On March 30th, 2020, a group of ISIS members being held at the Gurion prison in northern Syria started a riot. Prior to this happening, there was footage of them holding up a sign to a security camera in their cell. The sign demanded that their human rights be provided. After this display, the inmates were able to break the doors to their cell. They had been chipping away at the sides of the doors in preparation for this. A riot started and several of the Syrian Democratic forces that were guarding the prison were injured. In all the chaos, 12 men escaped, but the Syrian military was unclear about whether or not these men had been recaptured. At number 5, we have the riot in Rio. Back in 2017, tensions were starting to get high at a prison in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. At this particular prison, capacity was for 592 inmates, but 1,224 were in prison there. This, combined with 2 feuding gangs, led to a massive riot where 56 people were killed and many more escaped. The riot was so big that word came down the grapevine to 2 other prisons where where the inmates there had riots in response. At one of those prisons, 86 men escaped, and one of the dudes escaping posted a picture of himself on Facebook while he was breaking out. That has to be his new profile picture for sure. At number 4, we have the Sao Paulo State Penitentiary inmates don't like social distancing. With the spread of this deadly virus, there have been a lot of changes. One of those changes was to the inmates at the Sao Paulo State Penitentiary. Many of these inmates are under partial sentences and are allowed to leave on certain days of the week. But with the spread of COVID-19, this freedom was taken away. Well, they were not having it. On March 16th, over 1,000 men rioted and overpowered the guards and broke free of the prison. Almost 200 were rearrested, but it's thought that over 1,000 inmates are still at large. Videos of men running from the prison in orange jumpsuits were posted all over the internet. At number 3, we have the New Mexico State Penitentiary riots. This is known as one of the most brutal riots of all time. During this riot, at least 5 prisoners escaped, but that was just a side story to what was actually going on. Inside the prison, the prisoners went crazy and took over the whole penitentiary. They took hostages. Most of the hostages were prison guards and the rest were inmates. Many prisoners took this time as an opportunity for revenge. There had been several inmates within the prison who had been working as informants to prison guards, and this is a big no-no in the prison world, so anyone who was known to be a rat was killed, and not fast. They were slowly tortured. It took 36 hours, but eventually police were able to regain control of this facility. At number 2, we have the Gaios escapees. Here's something I didn't know about Brazil. They have some of the deadliest prison riots in the world. People are frequently killed in prison riots over in Brazil. In 2017, 140 people died in prison riots, and in 2018 there was a massive riot at the prison in the city of Gaios. 2 rival gangs started a turf war in the prison and all hell broke loose. 14 people were killed, and of those men, one of them had their head sliced right off his body. During this time, 109 prisoners were able to escape. I also read when something like this happens, the guards just kind of let it happen, because if they try to intervene, they will just end up dying, so they kind of have no choice. For the number 1 spot, we have EDS and the Iranian prison riots. Electronic Data Services was a tech company working in Iran in the 1970s. They had been working with the Shah, and when the Ayatollah decided to storm the country and take control, it was time for EDS to get out of there. But in the process of trying to get everyone out, 2 American workers were captured, William Gaylord and Paul Chiparone. William Gaylord and Paul Chiparone were now locked up in an Iranian prison, which is probably a hell I can't even imagine. The American government wasn't going to step in, so it looked like both these men were lost to this horror, even though they committed no crime. Well, thankfully, they had the best boss in the world. Ross Perlott was the CEO and was determined to get his men free from this prison. He paid a mercenary to get a rebel group together to storm the prison. This caused a riot, and then the 2 men were able to escape. Dude, how has this not been a movie yet?
Starting us off at number 10 is Frank Abagnale, and if that name sounds familiar, then you probably watched Catch Me If You Can, starring a young Leonardo DiCaprio, because that's who the film was based on. Frank had been committing crimes since the age of 15 and became one of the most notorious imposters ever, occupying nearly 8 identities. His first escape occurred when he was getting deported to the US. He somehow managed to escape off a British plane that had just landed at JFK. How do you even escape a taxiing plane? It's literally still moving. Either way, a few days later he was caught by the RCMP in Montreal and handed over to Border Patrol. In 1971, while he was awaiting his trial, he managed to escape from the federal detention center in Atlanta. His accompanying US Marshal had idiotically forgotten his detention commitment papers, and so Frank used that to his advantage and convinced guards that he was an undercover prison inspector. This act even got him better treatment and food than other inmates. He went further by contacting an accomplice on the outside and making her bring him his own inspector business card, as well as a fake Sean O'Reilly business card, Sean being the FBI agent in charge of his case. He made up some story about needing to meet with Sean immediately, and so he was literally allowed to just walk out of the prison unaccompanied to meet Sean, where he then was obviously picked up by his accomplice. And he did all of this before turning 22.
Next up at number 9, Nicholas Garrison. Arrested with several drug charges back in 2020, Nicholas tried his luck and made a run while in the courthouse. Out of nowhere, he manages to escape the grasps of the sheriffs detaining him and bolts, pushing past others in the courthouse, with the sheriffs chasing after him close behind. Once outside of the chamber, he headed for the staircase, at which point the sheriff made a leaping dive down the stairs head first to try and catch him. ultimately breaking a few ribs and getting a concussion. Garrison managed to escape him and sprinted down the stairs as fast as he could. He was later found in a motel and arrested, and now faces far worse charges than his original 6 months.
At number 8 we have Alfred George Hinds. Alfie was a British criminal who grew up rough in a children's home after his dad died while receiving 10 lashes for stealing. And the apple clearly doesn't fall far from the tree, because Alfie went on to become a robber himself. Daddy would have been proud of you, son. Now, while serving a 12-year prison sentence for jewelry robbery, Alfie managed to escape from not 1, not 2, but 3 high security prisons. The first one came in 1958 when he was locked up in Nottingham prison. He somehow managed to get through a series of locked doors and over a 20-foot wall, which earned him the name Houdini Hinds. He stayed free for nearly a year before being arrested once again, this time by Scotland Yard detectives. This time though, he brought a lawsuit against authorities for illegal arrest, which meant he would have to be taken to the law courts. Time for escape numero dos. On the way there, the truck stopped so Alfie could use the bathroom. When his 2 escorts took his handcuffs off, he bundled them both into the cubicle and put a padlock on so they couldn't get out. Sadly, the taste of freedom only lasted 5 hours before he was re-arrested at the airport. His third and final escape was from Chelmsford prison a year later. He fled to Ireland after that, living there for 2 years under an assumed name before he was caught again. I mean, the man's perseverance, I'll give him that. Good on you. Filling our number 7 slot is the Texas 7. Dubbed as the biggest prison break in Texas history, this colossal event took place back in December of 2000. The criminals were serving time at the maximum security prison called the John B. Connolly Unit. The 7 were led by 30-year-old George Rivas, who was serving 18 consecutive 15 to life sentences for kidnapping and robbery. The other men included 2 convicted murderers, a child abuser, and the rest were all sexual predators. What a gang. But I have to give it to them, their plan was very well executed. The escape started at lunchtime, which was the slowest period of the prison day, and there was usually less surveillance in certain areas at that time as well. One of the men would call someone over while another one would hit them over the head. Once the person was unconscious, the men would steal their clothing and then tie and gag them. The assailants managed to overpower 9 civilian maintenance supervisors, 4 officers, and 3 other inmates. Following the plan, the men then acted like prison officers on the phone to evade suspicion. Then 3 of the civilian disguised men went to the back gate pretending to install video monitors when really they were there to raid and steal weapons from the guard tower. They then quickly stole a pickup truck and picked up the 4 other inmates still inside the prison. I feel like as soon as everyone got in the van, everyone's like, "Hey, whole lot of gang shit, we made it." That's what I would have done, personally. Now at number 6 is Pascal Payet. Okay, despite being a criminal, I was wowed by Pascal after reading his story. So Pascal was a French thief and murderer who escaped 3 prisons, which has already been done by others on our list, but not with this much panache. So Pascal was a French thief and murderer who escaped 3 prisons, which has already been done by others on this list, but not with the same panache as Pascal. Pascal did it with, it was beautiful. In October 2001, he escaped from a prison located in the village of Luina. Hopefully I said that right, I probably didn't, but I tried my best. He did that by hitching a ride on a hijacked helicopter that his friends landed on the roof of the facility. It took a record 6 days for him to be captured again and sent back to the same jail. After 2 years of being locked up, he literally organized the exact same escape he did before, except this time he took 3 more prisoners with him. Oh, come on, people. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. He used the exact same way. Did you guys literally learn nothing after the first time? Either way, Pascal was caught again and sentenced to 30 years in prison for murdering someone in 2005. At this point, he was one of, if not the most closely surveilled prisoner in France. They were so scared he'd escape again, they moved him to a different prison every 6 months. His third escape came in the form of Bastille Day, when 4 masked men hijacked a helicopter and used it to free Pascal once again. He's literally the flying escapee. I love it. Coming in at number 5 is Michel Vaugeot. This one's a little bit funny and a little bit ridiculous, so I was like, why not? Michel was a French thief and murderer who had 12 convictions in his name, meaning he had to serve around 95 years in prison. His wife Nadine was desperate to get him out, so together they hatched a plan which involved her taking numerous helicopter flight lessons. In May of 1986, Michel had somehow painted nectarines to look like grenades. He used them to force his way onto the prison's roof, where his wife conveniently picked him up in a helicopter. The duo landed in a random football field and then fled by car, but sadly their reunion ended sooner rather than later. Nadine was captured somewhere in southwestern France, and Michel was shot in the head later on during a failed robbery job. Nectarines? Who would have thought? And number 4 is the key. So America has Alcatraz, and in the 20th century, Britain's version of Alcatraz was Parkhurst Prison, located on the Isle of Wight. Matthew Williams, Keith Rose, and Andrew Roger were all serving time there for things like planting a bomb and murder, so you don't want to mess with these guys. All 3 inmates worked in the prison's metal sheet shop, which meant they had access to an array of tools that other inmates didn't. They hatched a plan which involved memorizing the outline of a guard's master key and then making a replica in the shop. In early 1995, they set the plan into motion. The key allowed them to get through any set of doors in the facility, and they had even made a homemade gun in case things went south. Preparation, I like it. When the trio reached the mesh fence, they cut through it and used a 25-foot steel ladder they had made to scale the wall. The plan was a success, and the trio went to the town of Sandown hatching their next illegal plan before being caught by an off-duty prison officer. After that slap in the face, Parkhurst was no longer considered the British Alcatraz. And I mean rightly so. Filling our number 3 slot is Chwe Kabok. I think the way this man escaped jail impressed me more than anyone on this list, hands down. Back in September of 2012, yoga master Chwe was suspected for robbery and later arrested and put in a cell at a police station in Daegu. He was there for a whopping 5 days before deciding enough of this shit, we out here. On the 17th, he applied an ointment on the upper part of his body, making him slippery, which was key for his plan. He then escaped by sliding through the tiny food slot at the bottom of his cell. His ingenious plan took 34 seconds to execute, and you can bet your ass it was all thanks to all that yoga. Standing at 5'4" himself, which is my height, the slot he had to fit into was 5.9 inches tall and 17.7 inches wide. Are you kidding? 5.9 inches is 15 centimeters, you guys. My head wouldn't even fit through that. He did it while the guards were asleep and even made a makeshift chair out of pillows and blankets to fool the guards, an idea he got from Shawshank Redemption. The Korean Houdini was captured 2 days later after a massive manhunt was ordered. But God, in the food slot. Now at number 2 is Alcatraz, and I wasn't going to include this infamous escape story on the list because I figured everyone had already heard about it, but then I was like, they've heard it for a reason, it's sick and it's frickin' Alcatraz. Deemed unescapable, the maximum security prison is literally an island. If you did escape, death was very much plausible in the water. On the 11th of June 1962, 3 inmates put their escape plan into action. They had created paper mache dummies and stuck hair on them collected from the prison's barbershop and left them in their cells as decoys. They then escaped through a tunnel they had spent a year digging with a spoon. From there, they went to an unused service corridor, to a ventilation shaft, and finally to the roof. From there, they scaled a fence and made a DIY raft out of things they had stolen from the prison and set sail at 10 p.m. Guards didn't even realize the trio were missing till the next morning, but the men were never seen again. The FBI spent ages looking for them near and around the area, but after 17 years of investigating, they concluded the trio most likely drowned in the water. Or they're just very good at living undetectable lives. And finally, at number 1 is Yoshie Shiratori. This man became infamous in Japan as an anti-hero since he had escaped from jail 4 bloody times. Yoshie was arrested because he was forced to confess to a murder he never committed and therefore sentenced to life plus 23 years. Yoshie was arrested because he was forced to confess to a murder he never committed and therefore sentenced to life plus 23 years. Yes, he did falsely confess to a murder, but that doesn't make the guy sweet. The man was a deadly jack of all trades, you guys. He could scale walls, pick locks, and dislocate any of his joints at will. He was sent to Aomori prison where he was tortured and beaten by the guards every single night, and the cherry on top of all of that was that prosecutors were seeking the death penalty for him, so he was like, gotta go. At 5:30 a.m. when the prison guards were on break, he used a metal wire he had stolen from the bathroom to pick his cell lock, and then numerous other door locks before making it out of the prison. Finally making it out of the prison. He was recaptured 3 days later and put into the same prison, but transferred to Akita prison 6 years later, where he was ridiculed by guards. He was put into a special solitary confinement cell with extremely high walls and only one small skylight window. The room was designed to be inescapable, but Yoshie proved them wrong. One night, as a guard checked in on him, he found the cell empty and his handcuffs on the ground. He'd picked the handcuff lock and scaled the wall like a freaking lizard and escaped through the skylight window that he'd been loosening for months. 2 years later, he was jailed again, this time in Abashiri prison, where he used miso soup to rust off his handcuffs and inspection hall. He was then caught again and sentenced to death, so he had to escape this time, and he did again. Yoshie dug a tunnel and escaped for a record 4th time.
Starting off this crazy list, and at number 10, we have a very dangerous inmate who escaped from an Arkansas jail.
The Arkansas man dives through the tiny window that leads to the jail waiting room, just ahead of a deputy who squeezes through and tries to catch him. It didn't work.
Is this real life right now? How did the deputy not catch him? He was literally behind him. The escaped convict was Derek Estill, and he managed to escape jail by squeezing through a little window and running towards a getaway car that was driven by his girlfriend. Estill was originally serving time behind bars for aggravated robbery, breaking and entering, and burglary. But I bet if he wasn't a criminal, he could have had a shot at the Olympics for running the 100-meter dash. Number 9 takes us over to the easiest prison escape ever. What is something that all inmates wish for when they're breaking out of jail? They probably want an unlocked cell door, a distraction, right? Well, that's exactly what Tori Smith got. Let's take a look at her daring escape. Tori Smith was arrested for aggravated assault on her boyfriend, and she was brought to a New Orleans jail for processing, but I guess she saw a crack in the security, so she decided to take it. It was discovered that a prison guard accidentally left 2 doors open. Well, I think it's safe to say that this prison guard was definitely fired. After her easy escape from the prison, she then scaled the fence, but she was rearrested just 24 hours she managed to escape. I hope they remembered to lock the doors this time. Alright, number 8 brings us to the dumbest prison guard ever. A Romanian police officer was given the simple task of escorting 2 prisoners to a nearby courthouse. He was supposed to lead them into a police van and then bring them to their hearing when this happened. As the 3 of them are walking towards the van, the prisoner sees an escape opportunity and decides to take it. The prison guard apparently lost all of his police training and his common sense as well, because he unlocked the fence and decided to chase after him. So now we have this second convict who has found himself in a great spot. He does what any other inmates would do and decides to make a run for it. This prison guard now has 2 escaped convicts, and he can only chase down one of them because they ran in opposite directions. Now that's what I call an awful day at work. Crashing onto this list at number 7, we have a bulldozer that hits a prison. I'm not making this stuff up. This literally sounds like a scene from a movie, but I promise you guys this actually happened. Take my word for it. Well, let's take a look.
Emerging from a cloud of debris is a 20-ton bulldozer. It is slammed into the exterior of the prison, knocking a gaping hole in the wall.
12 prisoners actually managed to escape from a maximum security prison in Denmark. I think they should take out the word maximum. These prisoners were definitely not the kind that you want roaming in your neighborhood streets. They were robbers, drug dealers, and murderers. Before the escape happened, a former inmate was in contact with people inside of the prison with a cell phone that he threw over the wall. He then stole a bulldozer and smashed through the walls and released some of the prisoners inside. I wonder if he had another getaway car, because a bulldozer isn't fast enough. Imagine running away from police officers and you're in a bulldozer that goes like 20 kilometers an hour. Yeah. Up next, number 6, we have a very violent prison escape. 3 prisoners escaped from a detention center in China after they attacked and killed a prison guard. It's no surprise that all 3 of these men were in prison for a very violent crimes, including murder. So here's how the escape went down. One of the inmates asked the prison guards if he can make a phone call. Once they were alone in the room, he began to strangle the guard to death. The other 2 inmates then ran into the room and grabbed the keys. They all changed into prison guard uniforms and were able to walk out of the prison one by one without being detected, right out the front door. Police offered a $20,000 reward for any information that would help them recapture these inmates. Well, they were recaptured in about 10 days after the escape went down, so 2 of the men captured was handed the death sentence, while the other one was given given a life sentence for his involvement with the escape. The man who impersonated another prisoner, who was set to be released, what a big dum-dum, well, he climbs into this list at number 5. We have Rocky Marquez. He's managed to escape not once, but twice. He escaped out of the prison system in 2 separate states. I'm a little impressed here, but a bit scared because he's dangerous. Well, police officials just can't seem to have him locked up behind bars. But my favorite escape that he did was when he impersonated an inmate who was being released.
Authorities say he switched identity bracelets with this man, 36-year-old Mikel Galavez, another inmate scheduled for release, which is all it took for Marquez to get out. It all left Phoenix authorities stunned.
So basically, he just walked right out of the prison. He didn't even need to run or scale any fences. He didn't need to steal a bulldozer. What makes things even worse, the prison guards didn't even know that he was missing from the jail until 5 days later. So this guy was ahead of the police officers by 5 days. So either he is smarter than the average criminal, or these prison guards are just idiots. We have another deadly prison escape, and this comes in at number 4.
Convicted murderer lunging at an Iowa sheriff's deputy, stabbing him in the neck and face with a shank.
After the inmate stabbed the officer, he was able to unlock his shackles with a key, and he raced to grab the gun that was in the van.
Rhea Carminati fatally shooting Deputy Mark Burbridge and firing a bullet into Deputy Pat Morgan's torso.
After the inmate was in the clear, the killer managed to escape
And slamming the van through the jail's garage door. He then carjacks a vehicle before police chase him down.
Eventually, after the escape, he crashed his car into a retaining wall, and the officers were able to apprehend him. Now he is sentenced to prison without having the possibility of parole. And now at number 3, we have a prisoner who attempted to escape through a toilet. I know this doesn't seem like the most glamorous way to escape. Definitely, if that was my only way of escape, I would just be locked up forever. It wouldn't be an option to me. But I guess prison makes you pretty desperate. This must be the most optimistic prisoner on the planet, because I don't see how he ever thought that he would be able to escape through this gross communal toilet. Hopefully it's been flushed before he actually, watch this. Pretty gross. Well, after spending some time deep in some pretty disgusting doo-doo, he realized that he can't squeeze his way through this hole, and the man is pulled back in by his cellmates. How embarrassing. What a day. It was a bad decision. I have so many questions about this prison. What kind of disgusting prison has a corner for a toilet? And secondly, why do these inmates have cell phones? Couldn't they call someone from outside to help them escape? My eyes are scarred, so let's move on. El Chapo digs himself into number 2 spot. This gets insane. Joaquin Guzman is one of the most notorious drug lords of all time, and he is considered to be one of the most powerful drug traffickers in the world. He was arrested by the Mexican authorities, but he managed to escape prison after he bribed some prison guards to open his cell. 6 months after the escape, he was recaptured, and because his escape humiliated police officials, they had promised that he would never escape prison again. Well, you guys are watching this video. As it turns out, they were wrong. As you guys saw, El Chapo was sitting in his cell when all of a sudden he walks over to his shower area and disappeared. Upon further investigation, he didn't just turn into a ghost and walk out. He didn't actually disappear. He's not Houdini. Well, maybe he's Houdini, because that's pretty impressive what he did. So upon further investigation, the police found a 2x2 foot hole underneath the shower, and this led to an elaborate tunnel that was almost a mile long. The tunnel had lighting, ventilation, and oh yeah, it also had a motorcycle. He managed to remain free for about 3 years before he was recaptured. Now he lives in a very restricted cell with no windows, no motorcycles underneath his cell, and he can't talk to any other inmates or even his own family. Number 1 brings us to the Great Canadian Helicopter Escape. This has to be one of the craziest prison escapes I've ever seen. These 2 inmates escaped from a Quebec prison back in 2013, and the whole escape was caught on video. If it wasn't, you wouldn't believe it. They had 2 outside accomplices who managed to hijack a helicopter and force the pilot to fly to the jail. In the video, we can see these 2 inmates climbing up this rope in order to get to the roof where the helicopter was waiting. However, one of them had difficulty climbing the rope, so they both just hung on as the helicopter took off. I know this sounds like an epic escape, but they struggled so hard. I wonder why the police weren't able to stop, because it took them so long to actually leave the jail. Well, as it turns out, just a few hours later, the police were able to find these inmates and arrest them. And during a statement, the union president said that the guards were unable to interfere with the helicopter escape because it's only in the movies where you can shoot down a helicopter with a gun. So yeah.